Victor understands my future.
You deserve someone successful. I hope one day you understand what truly matters.
Sign it. We're finished.
She finally chose the right man. If that's your decision, I'll respect it.
Chairman Price, the board is ready for your approval. Adrian, you own all of this?
I never hid who I was, you simply never asked.
Eleanor Price raised her champagne glass and introduced Victor Hale as the kind of man her husband would never become. Investors and relatives turned toward Adrian, seated near the ballroom service entrance in a plain navy suit. Her brother laughed. Her mother questioned why an unsuccessful consultant had been invited. Then Eleanor placed divorce papers beside Adrian's plate, unaware that the billion-dollar deal they were celebrating still required his private approval. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 months earlier, Eleanor still believed her husband had nothing worth hiding. The Halcyon Grand Hotel glowed above downtown Chicago that evening, its ballroom filled with crystal light, expensive suits, and people who spoke about money as though it were proof of character. The annual Price Urban Foundation Gala was supposed to celebrate the rescue of Price Meridian Properties, the commercial real estate company Eleanor's family had controlled for decades. Eleanor stood near the stage in a silver gown, accepting congratulations as the company's newly promoted development director. Victor ridden beside her, polished and confident, one hand resting lightly against the back of her chair. He was the private equity advisor, everyone credited with finding the investor that might save Price Meridian from its growing debt. Adrian had arrived alone. He wore a dark navy suit without a visible label and carried no sense of urgency. At 40, he looked like what Eleanor told people he was, an independent infrastructure consultant with a decent income, limited connections, and no interest in becoming important. Celeste Price, Eleanor's mother, had personally changed the seating chart less than an hour before the event. Business leaders should sit together, she had told the event coordinator. Adrian won't mind being farther back, so Victor received the chair beside Eleanor. Adrian was placed near a set of swinging doors used by servers carrying trays between the ballroom and the kitchen. Graham Price noticed immediately. "Careful, Adrian," Eleanor's brother said as he passed. "They might hand you an apron sitting that close to the staff." Two relatives laughed. Adrian only adjusted his cuff and thanked the server who filled his water glass. Across the ballroom, the hotel's managing director, Samuel Reed, watched him with visible unease. Samuel knew Adrian had approved the hotel's renovation budget 3 weeks earlier. He also knew Adrian disliked public attention. When their eyes met, Samuel took one step forward. Adrian gave him a small shake of the head. Not yet. Eleanor approached the table after the first presentation. She did not sit. Victor remained behind her, close enough to make the message clear. "You could have worn something more appropriate," she said quietly. Adrian looked down at his suit. "It's appropriate. For a client meeting, maybe. Not for this room." Her voice was controlled, but several nearby guests could hear. Celeste could too. She gave Adrian a thin smile that carried no warmth. "This night matters to Eleanor," she said. "Try not to make it about your feelings." Adrian looked at his wife. 7 years earlier, she would have been embarrassed by her mother's tone. Now she seemed relieved someone else had said what she wanted him to hear. Victor leaned toward the table. "These events can be uncomfortable if you're not used to them." Adrian met his eyes. "I'm comfortable." Victor smiled as though Adrian had missed the insult. A few minutes later, Eleanor stepped onto the stage. She thanked the company's lenders, advisors, and longtime partners. Then she turned toward Victor. "This man understood what Price Meridian needed," she said. "Courage. Ambition." The applause grew. Eleanor's gaze moved to Adrian at the back of the room. Sometimes, she continued, growth requires us to stop carrying relationships that no longer move forward with us. The room became quieter. She walked down from the stage holding a cream-colored envelope. Cameras followed her as she crossed the ballroom. When she reached Adrian's table, she placed the envelope beside his plate. Preliminary divorce documents. You don't need to make a scene, she said. Sign them after the gala. For once, let me have one night without being embarrassed by you. Graham laughed under his breath. Celeste did not correct him. Victor pulled out Eleanor's chair and sat beside her as though the position had always belonged to him. Adrian rested one hand on the envelope but did not open it. His phone vibrated inside his jacket. The message came through an encrypted board portal. Price Meridian final, review complete. Mifriel disclosure emifu igitifi. Chairman, Offiverik before closing. Adrian read it once. Across the room, Samuel Reed received the same alert. His expression changed. He left the hotel executives gathered near the stage and began walking toward Adrian's table. Eleanor reached for the envelope again. "Well?" she asked. "Are you going to sign?" Before Adrian answered, Samuel stopped beside him and lowered his voice. "Sir, the board needs direction. Should they proceed without her?" 3 months earlier, Eleanor still believed her husband had nothing worth hiding. Adrian and Eleanor Price lived in a narrow, brick townhouse in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood. It was comfortable without being impressive. The kitchen had been renovated once. The furniture had been chosen carefully, and the car in the garage was 5 years old. Nothing about the house suggested private jets, boardrooms, or fortunes large enough to move markets. That was exactly how Adrian preferred it. To Eleanor, he was an independent infrastructure consultant. He reviewed transportation projects, advised institutional clients, and traveled often enough to make his work seem legitimate but ordinary. He earned well, paid his share of every bill, and never appeared worried about money. Yet he did not chase promotions, attend fashionable networking events, or speak about success in ways Eleanor's family respected. Her mother called him comfortable. Her brother called him harmless. Lately, Eleanor had begun using both words as insults. That morning, Adrian stood at the kitchen counter, reading a secure report on his tablet while Eleanor prepared for work. She wore a fitted charcoal suit and moved quickly, checking her reflection between sips of coffee. "Another consulting call?" she asked. "Board review," Adrian said. She gave a distracted laugh. "Your clients really like making ordinary meetings sound important." Adrian locked the screen before she could see the North Star Meridian logo in the corner. He had never directly lied about his work. Before their marriage, he had told Eleanor that his family maintained private investments and that most of his assets were held through trusts. He had also insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Eleanor had received independent legal advice before signing it. Her attorney reviewed the schedules, explained the separate property provisions, and told her Adrian's family structure was complex. But the documents listed categories of holdings rather than a public estimate of their future value. Eleanor assumed the trusts contained several properties, old investment accounts, and perhaps a few $1,000,000 inherited from relatives. Adrian never corrected that assumption. At the time, it had seemed safer. Years before meeting Eleanor, Adrian had been engaged to another woman. Once her family learned how much influence he held, every conversation changed. Wedding plans became investment proposals. Family dinners became requests for jobs, loans, and introductions. The relationship ended after his fiancée referred to one of his companies as what we'll control after the wedding. He had carried that sentence with him. When he met Eleanor, she had seemed different. She worked long hours at Price Meridian Properties and paid for her own apartment. She spoke about buildings, neighborhoods, and the satisfaction of completing difficult projects. On their third date, she told him she wanted a partner, not a provider. Adrian believed her. For the first years of their marriage, the simplicity worked. Eleanor laughed at his old car. Adrian cooked when she worked late. They spent Sundays walking along the lake and arguing gauchedly about which buildings had been ruined by careless renovation. She never asked for access to his accounts, and he never used money to influence her decisions. But Price Meridian had begun weakening. The family company owned valuable commercial properties across Illinois and Wisconsin, yet several recent developments had underperformed. Interest costs rose. Tenants left 2 major office buildings. Eleanor's father refused to sell anything because he believed shrinking the portfolio would make the family look weak. As the pressure grew, Eleanor changed. She began attending more private dinners with lenders, developers, and advisors. She came home speaking about people who owned vacation homes in Aspen and flew to meetings instead of driving. She complained that Adrian's wardrobe looked modest beside the husbands of other executives. One evening, she found him reviewing a confidential transportation map at the dining table. You know what Graham said? She asked, dropping her purse onto a chair. He said you've been consulting for years and still haven't built anything anyone can point to. Adrian closed the folder. Does Graham know what my clients hire me to do? That isn't the point. What is the point? Eleanor looked at him for several seconds. The point is that people should be able to see progress. Adrian heard what she did not say. They should be able to see his value. His phone vibrated against the table. The caller ID displayed the name of North Star's general counsel. Adrian declined the call and sent a brief message asking for 10 minutes. Eleanor noticed. Another client emergency? Something that needs my approval. She shook her head as if he had exaggerated again. You always make your little projects sound so serious. Adrian could have corrected her then. He could have opened the report and shown her the infrastructure funds, logistics companies, energy holdings, and pension mandates under North Star's control. But revealing the truth in response to contempt would have turned wealth into a defense of his humanity. He refused to do that. Instead, he stood and carried his coffee cup to the sink. I have a call upstairs, he said. Eleanor was already looking at her phone. A new message had softened her expression in a way Adrian had not seen directed at him for months. He left without asking who had sent it. In his study, he locked the door and returned the general counsel's call. We received a request for preliminary financing review, she told him. Commercial real estate. Chicago-based. The borrower is Price Meridian Properties. Adrian looked through the closed door toward the room, where his wife was still smiling at someone else's message. Send me the file, he said. A moment later, another name appeared on the secure summary, Victor Hale. Victor Hale's name stayed on Adrian's screen long after the secure file finished loading. The request had come through Meridian Renewal Partners, one of North Star's investment subsidiaries. On paper, it looked ordinary. A distressed real estate company needed emergency capital, debt restructuring, and time. Price Meridian owned valuable properties, but several projects were bleeding cash. 2 lenders had already raised concerns about covenant violations. What did not look ordinary was Victor's role. He was listed as an outside restructuring advisor, with authority to submit confidential financial records on behalf of the Price family. Eleanor's electronic authorization appeared beneath his name. Adrian read the document twice. He did not call her immediately. Anger could make a person focus on the wrong problem, and there were several problems in front of him now. His wife had given a man he did not know access to her family company's most sensitive information. That man had delivered it to an investment platform Eleanor believed was far beyond Adrian's world, and she had done it without mentioning any of it at home. Over the next 2 weeks, Victor began appearing everywhere. Eleanor first introduced him casually. He was someone Graham had recommended. Then he became the advisor helping her father deal with lenders. Soon, his name entered nearly every conversation. Victor understood distressed assets. Victor knew people in private equity. Victor had access to capital. Adrian listened without correcting her. Victor was 38, polished, and skilled at creating the impression that every room had been waiting for him. He drove a black luxury sedan that Adrian later learned was leased through his consulting firm. He belonged to 2 private clubs and posted photographs from charity dinners, where he stood near people wealthier than himself. There was nothing illegal about any of that. But Adrian had spent years around men who controlled real money. They rarely spoke about access as often as Victor did. The first time Victor came to the townhouse, Eleanor invited him for what she called a working dinner. Adrian returned from his office to find Victor seated at the dining table, jacket removed, sleeves rolled back, studying Price Meridian's debt schedule. Eleanor stood beside him with 2 glasses of wine. Adrian, she said, sounding more surprised than pleased. I thought you had a late call. It ended early. Victor stood and extended his hand. Victor Hale, I've heard you do some consulting. Adrian shook it. Infrastructure. Public sector? Sometimes. Victor nodded in a way that suggested the answer confirmed something small. Different world from what we're dealing with here. Adrian looked at the spreadsheet on the table. You have 3 loans resetting within 6 months. Eleanor's expression tightened. Victor glanced down. That's one way to describe it. The office portfolio is carrying too much floating rate debt, Adrian continued. If occupancy drops again, the lender could demand additional reserves. Silence settled over the table. Victor recovered first. That information isn't public. Adrian looked at Eleanor. Then it probably shouldn't be open in the dining room. She closed the laptop sharply. We know what we're doing, I asked a question. No, you tried to prove you belong in the conversation. Victor raised one hand. It's fine, he's concerned. The word concerned sounded almost charitable. Adrian felt the insult, but what stayed with him was Eleanor's relief when Victor defended her from a threat Adrian had not made. After that night, Victor became part of the family's routine. He attended lender meetings with Raymond Price. He joined Graham at private clubs. Celeste praised his manners and called him the first advisor who understood the importance of preserving the family name. Eleanor came home later. Her explanations remained reasonable at first: strategy sessions, investor dinners, emergency calls. Adrian knew difficult transactions required long hours, so he gave her room. Then the small changes began. Her phone stayed face down at meals. She added a passcode she had never used before. She bought new dresses for lender presentations and stopped wearing her wedding ring to certain events because, she said, investors made assumptions about family businesses. One Thursday evening, Adrian saw an unfamiliar hotel charge on their shared credit card. Eleanor had told him she was attending a late meeting at Victor's club. He saved the statement. He did not accuse her. A marriage could not survive on suspicion, but neither could it survive by pretending evidence did not exist. The following morning, Eleanor stood at the bedroom mirror, fastening an expensive pair of earrings. Victor thinks I should lead negotiations when the rescue offer arrives, she said. Has an offer arrived? Not formally. Then he shouldn't be promising roles connected to it. She turned. You always do this. Do what? Make everything sound dangerous because you're uncomfortable with people who take risks. Adrian held her gaze. I'm uncomfortable with people who promise outcomes they don't control. Her expression hardened. Victor is trying to save my family's company. You review transportation reports. Please stop acting like those things are equal. She left before he answered. That afternoon, Adrian contacted North Star's general counsel and requested a full chain of custody review for every Price Meridian document submitted through Victor. The response arrived before midnight. Victor had uploaded the records. Eleanor had authorized the transfer, but the final page contained something neither of them had disclosed to Price Meridian's board. Victor had requested a success fee, a future board seat, and an executive position for Eleanor if the transaction closed. Adrian stared at her name on the document. Then his legal team sent one final note. Several of the files Victor submitted had been downloaded from Eleanor's personal account after midnight from a hotel network. Adrian did not sleep much that night. The hotel network logs remained open on his encrypted monitor. Every timestamp had been verified by North Star's compliance team before it reached him. The files themselves were legitimate. The problem was how they had been shared, who had received them, and what promises appeared to have accompanied them. He closed the report and called North Star's general counsel before sunrise. I'm declaring a conflict, he said. She was silent only a moment. Because of Mrs. Price? Yes, we expected that might become necessary. I want everything documented, independent valuation, independent negotiations, outside counsel on every material decision. You understand that removes you from pricing and transaction approval until the committee finishes its review. I know. And if the committee rejects the acquisition, then they reject it. She wrote nothing for several seconds. Understood, Mr. Chairman. After ending the call, Adrian stood beside the study window overlooking the quiet street. He could have influenced the process. Few people would ever know. But if he allowed personal pain to shape a transaction affecting thousands of employees, he would become exactly the kind of leader he had spent years refusing to be. Downstairs, Eleanor was already leaving for work. You're up early, she said while collecting her laptop bag. I have meetings, so do I. She hesitated, almost expecting another conversation about Victor. It never came. Adrian simply wished her a good day. The calm unsettled her more than an argument would have. Over the following weeks, North Star's investment committee began reviewing Price Meridian through Meridian Renewal Partners, the subsidiary assigned to distressed commercial acquisitions. Adrian attended only the opening disclosure meeting. He informed the directors that his wife worked for Price Meridian and that any investment could affect his household indirectly. The minutes reflected his disclosure, and independent counsel confirmed that he would recuse himself from valuation, pricing, and negotiations until the committee reached its recommendation. Everything followed procedure. Everything had to. Meanwhile, Price Meridian grew more desperate. Occupancy continued falling across several office properties. Loan maturities approached faster than Raymond Price had expected. Every lender demanded stronger guarantees before extending additional credit. Victor suddenly became the family's hero. He arrived at meetings carrying expensive leather folders and speaking confidently about institutional investors eager to rescue the company. Raymond praised him openly during executive meetings. Graham introduced him to everyone as the man who had found the solution. Only Victor knew he had not secured any money himself. He had merely positioned himself between Price Meridian and an investment group whose true leadership remained invisible to him. One evening, Eleanor returned home carrying a thick binder marked confidential. She left it on the dining table while answering a phone call. Adrian glanced at the cover. Meridian Renewal Partners, his own legal department's formatting. He recognized the language immediately. The proposed structure was exactly what North Star's committee had discussed. Purchase distressed debt, inject new operating capital, receive controlling equity if shareholders approved, protect existing employees, replace certain executives only after an independent governance review. It was balanced, commercially reasonable, designed to save the business rather than strip it apart. Eleanor returned before Adrian opened the binder. She noticed where his eyes had rested. "You wouldn't understand this," she said, picking it up. "I might understand more than you think." She smiled without humor. "Victor spent 6 months getting us into rooms people like you never enter," Adrian asked quietly. "Have you hired independent counsel to review the governance clauses?" She frowned. "We already have lawyers, not company lawyers, independent representation." She shook her head. "You sound jealous. I'm asking because those clauses matter." "No." She zipped the binder into her bag. "You're asking because you can't accept that someone else accomplished what you never could." The front door closed behind her before he answered. Later that afternoon, Adrian joined a secure video conference with North Star's governance committee. No cameras displayed company logos. Only names, only facts. The independent chair summarized the findings. Price Meridian owns valuable assets but has been poorly managed. "We recommend proceeding only if governance reforms are accepted." Another director agreed. "The capital is justified. Existing leadership is not." Adrian listened without offering an opinion. That restraint mattered. Near the end of the meeting, one executive addressed him automatically. "Mr. Chairman, will..." He stopped himself. Adrian muted his microphone. Unfortunately, he had forgotten Eleanor was working from the adjoining home office that afternoon. She stepped into the hallway just as the meeting ended. "Who called you, Chairman?" He answered without hesitation. "One of my institutional clients." She folded her arms. "That's a little dramatic. They're used to formal titles." She accepted the explanation because it fit the version of Adrian she already believed. A quiet consultant. A man important only inside small meetings. Nothing more. That evening, another encrypted report reached Adrian. North Star's compliance office had completed its review of Victor's communications. Attached were draft emails Victor had sent to private contacts. In them, he claimed that once the acquisition closed, Eleanor would become chief operating officer of Price Meridian, and he would receive both a success fee and a permanent board seat. Neither promise had been authorized. Neither had been disclosed to Price Meridian's directors. Adrian closed the file. Then another notification appeared beneath it. Compliance alert. During metadata review, one confidential document contains an internal comment identifying Chairman AP as the final authority required before transaction execution. The comment had not yet been noticed by the Price family, but it was still inside Eleanor's digital copy. Celeste Price hosted the celebration dinner at the family estate on Chicago's North Shore, as though the company had already been saved. The dining room had been arranged with deliberate precision. Crystal glasses reflected the chandelier above. Place cards marked every seat. At one end sat Raymond Price. Celeste occupied the opposite head of the table. Eleanor's place remained beside Victor. Adrian's place had been moved. It was now at the far end of the table. When he arrived, Celeste greeted him politely enough, but she never apologized for the new arrangement. We thought the business conversation would flow better this way, she said. Adrian simply nodded. I'm sure it will. Victor arrived a few minutes later carrying a bottle of expensive wine. Graham greeted him with a hug instead of a handshake. There's the man keeping this company alive, Graham announced. Raymond smiled. We wouldn't be sitting here like this without Victor. Victor accepted the praise with practiced humility. I've only connected the right people. Adrian noticed Eleanor, watching Victor with quiet admiration. She used to look at him that way. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Conversation centered on lenders, redevelopment projects, and market forecasts. Adrian listened more than he spoke. He recognized nearly every issue before anyone finished describing it. He knew which loan worried the banks most. He knew which shopping center had already lost its anchor tenant. He even knew which properties North Star's analysts considered worth preserving. Still, he remained silent. Halfway through the meal, Graham leaned back in his chair and looked toward Adrian. So, he asked loudly enough for everyone to hear, what's the biggest deal you've ever closed? The table became quiet. I don't usually discuss client matters, Graham laughed. That's convenient. Victor smiled into his wineglass. Celeste added gently. Surely consulting has its limits. Real business carries responsibility. Raymond nodded. Victor understands that. No one looked at Adrian. Everyone looked at Victor. Eleanor rested one hand lightly on the table near Victor's arm. The gesture was small. It was also impossible to misunderstand. Adrian noticed the silver bracelet on her wrist. He had given it to her on their 5th wedding anniversary. She still wore it, just not for him anymore. Conversation moved back toward the rescue transaction. Victor spoke confidently about institutional investors. The capital commitment is essentially settled, he said. We're only completing formalities, Adrian looked at him. Have all material relationships been disclosed? Victor met his eyes. What do you mean? Any relationship that could affect the transaction. Victor answered smoothly. My advisors know everything they need to know. Adrian shifted his attention to Eleanor. Have you asked outside counsel to review the governance provisions? She sighed heavily. Not this again. It matters. You keep saying that because you don't understand how these negotiations work. I understand more than you think. No. Eleanor's voice sharpened. You understand small consulting contracts. Victor understands institutional finance. Celeste placed her napkin neatly beside her plate. I think Eleanor deserves someone whose ambitions match her own. The sentence settled over the room. Nobody challenged it. Graham decided to push further. You've had 7 years, Adrian. Name one thing you've built that's changed Eleanor's life. Adrian answered honestly. I tried to build a marriage. For a brief second, no one spoke. Then Graham chuckled. Victor looked down politely, hiding a smile. Even Raymond looked away. The answer had confirmed exactly what they already believed. A decent man. A small man. A man with nothing substantial to offer. Only Eleanor understood how deeply the answer should have hurt her. Yet she did nothing. Instead, she said quietly, loyalty isn't enough anymore. Adrian looked at her. She continued before he could respond. I've spent years trying to move this family forward while you've stayed exactly where you were. Victor challenges me. He sees possibilities. I can't spend the rest of my life pretending that's not important. The words landed harder than any accusation. Not because they were loud, because she had rehearsed them. Victor finally spoke. I don't want this to become personal. It already is, Adrian replied calmly. Silence returned. Dessert arrived, but almost nobody touched it. When dinner finally ended, Adrian stepped onto the back terrace overlooking the dark shoreline. Cold wind rolled in from the lake. A few moments later, Eleanor joined him. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. I'll ask you one question. She folded her arms. Fine. Do you want to end whatever exists between you and Victor and try to repair this marriage? She did not hesitate. I don't owe you that conversation. You owe yourself an honest answer. My answer is that this marriage ended long before tonight. He searched her face. There was regret, but not enough, she continued quietly. Victor understands the future I want. Adrian nodded once. I understand. You're taking this well. I heard what I needed to hear. She expected anger. She expected pleading. Instead, Adrian walked past her, collected his coat, thanked Raymond for dinner, wished Celeste a good evening, and left without looking back. The drive home was silent. When he entered the townhouse, he removed his wedding ring and placed it carefully inside the top drawer of his desk. Then he opened a secure contact list and selected one name, Margaret Ellis, lead counsel. He typed only one sentence. Please activate the prenuptial review provisions and prepare a fair divorce petition. Keep all North Star matters confidential. He pressed send. Less than a minute later, Margaret replied, Understood. Filing can begin immediately. Earliest effective date, Monday morning. Adrian stared at the screen. Then another secure notification appeared beneath it. North Star compliance. Additional evidence received regarding Victor Hale and Eleanor Price. Private photographs attached. Potential undisclosed conflict confirmed. The gala at the Halcyon Grand Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers, television cameras, and polished speeches. But Adrian knew most of what surrounded the celebration rested on assumptions that had never been verified. He arrived alone. A hostess checked the seating chart before leading him across the ballroom, not toward Eleanor, not toward the Price family. She stopped beside a small table positioned near the service entrance, where waitstaff quietly moved in and out carrying silver trays. I'm sorry, Mr. Price, she whispered. These were the instructions we received. It's fine, Adrian answered. Across the room, Celeste noticed him and smiled with quiet satisfaction. Exactly where he belongs, she thought. Guests continued arriving while photographers gathered near the stage. Raymond welcomed investors. Graham laughed loudly with local developers. Eleanor stood beside Victor, wearing an elegant black evening gown and greeting everyone as though the rescue deal had already transformed the family's future. Victor thrived under the attention. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, and spoke confidently about North Star's investment. The agreement is essentially complete, he told one lender. We're only waiting for ceremonial signatures. Adrian heard every word. The agreement was not complete. Several governance reviews remained outstanding. Conflict disclosures had not yet been finalized. The investment committee had not issued its final recommendation. Victor either misunderstood the process or intentionally exaggerated it. Neither possibility inspired confidence. A waiter quietly refilled Adrian's water. A moment later, another man approached. He wore the tailored suit of senior hotel management. Good evening, sir. It was Daniel Brooks, managing director of the Halcyon Grand. His expression remained perfectly professional. I've reserved the executive lounge if you require privacy before the presentation. Adrian gave an almost invisible shake of his head. Not tonight, Daniel understood immediately, of course. He stepped away before anyone nearby noticed the exchange. From across the ballroom, Eleanor happened to glance in Adrian's direction. She saw only a hotel executive greeting a guest, nothing more. She returned her attention to Victor. The ballroom lights dimmed. Raymond welcomed everyone and thanked Victor for helping secure the most important investment in Price Meridian's history. Applause filled the room. Victor accepted the recognition with practiced confidence. Our investors believe in this company, he declared. The future begins tonight. Adrian remained still. Only his phone vibrated beneath the table. A secure notification appeared. Final legal review completed. Independent committee awaiting chairman authorization. He locked the screen without replying. The authority remained entirely his. No one around him suspected it. Dinner was served. Conversations drifted through the ballroom. Several Price relatives passed Adrian's table without acknowledging him. One cousin whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I didn't realize spouses without jobs still received invitations. Another laughed. Maybe they needed someone to fill the empty seats. Adrian continued eating. He refused to perform wounded pride for people who had already decided who he was. Later, Graham approached carrying a glass of champagne. You look comfortable back here, I am. You know the service entrance actually suits you. Adrian looked up calmly. If that's what you believe it is. Graham leaned closer. Victor belongs at the front of the room, you never did. Without another word, Graham walked away. Adrian simply watched him leave. The anger Graham expected never appeared. That unsettled him more than any argument could have. Soon afterward, the master of ceremonies invited Eleanor onto the stage. She spoke confidently about resilience, family legacy, and visionary partnerships. Then she smiled toward Victor. There are moments when life teaches you that some people help you grow while others hold you back. Several guests nodded knowingly. Victor walked onto the stage beside her. Cameras immediately turned toward them. Eleanor reached for his hand. She did not hide the gesture. Instead, she allowed every flashbulb in the ballroom to capture it. Then she looked toward Adrian. For the sake of honesty, she said into the microphone, some relationships deserve a respectful ending instead of endless pretending. A member of the event staff approached Adrian's table carrying a leather folder. Inside rested preliminary divorce papers, unsigned, prepared for public display. Eleanor continued speaking. I hope my husband understands that ambition sometimes requires difficult choices. The room became uncomfortably quiet. Some guests looked embarrassed, others waited eagerly. Victor folded his hands with practiced sympathy. Celeste watched Adrian carefully. She wanted him to lose control, or to shout, to beg. Instead, Adrian opened the folder. He calmly turned each page. Then he closed it again. He neither signed nor argued. His silence made the room strangely uneasy. Across the ballroom, Daniel Brooks had already begun walking toward him. Halfway there, he stopped. Adrian had lifted one finger almost imperceptibly. Not yet. Daniel immediately changed direction, pretending to greet another table. Only a handful of senior executives noticed. None spoke. Another secure message appeared on Adrian's phone. North Star General Counsel. Material conflict documentation complete. False representations by Victor Hale recorded. Awaiting your instruction before board notification. Adrian read it once. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket. The presentation ended. Applause scattered unevenly across the ballroom. Eleanor stepped down from the stage, carrying a confident smile. She walked directly toward Adrian's table. She placed a pen beside the divorce papers. Go ahead, she said quietly enough that only nearby guests could hear. Let's stop embarrassing each other. Before Adrian could answer, Daniel Brooks approached again. This time he stopped beside Adrian's chair. He ignored Eleanor completely. With unmistakable respect, he lowered his voice. Mr. Price, he said, the board would like to know whether they should proceed without your authorization. Silence spread across the ballroom. Eleanor frowned at Daniel Brooks before looking back at Adrian. Authorization for what? Daniel remained composed. Years of managing luxury hotels had taught him never to answer questions directed above his authority. I'm sorry, Miss Price, that discussion isn't mine to have. Victor stepped forward with an easy smile. There must be some misunderstanding. Mr. Price is simply my client's spouse. Daniel didn't even look at him. My instructions came from corporate governance. The words sounded ordinary to most guests. To Raymond Price, they did not. He exchanged a quick glance with Graham. Both men had spent enough years negotiating commercial property deals to recognize corporate language when they heard it. Corporate governance, authorization, those words belonged to boardrooms, not hotel receptions. Eleanor folded her arms. Adrian, what exactly is going on? He closed the leather folder containing the divorce papers before answering. I think your event should continue. That's not an answer. It will have to be. Victor laughed softly, hoping to break the tension. This is becoming theatrical. He turned toward Daniel. If headquarters needs confirmation, they already have mine. We've been working on this transaction for months. Daniel finally looked at Victor. Respectfully, sir, your confirmation isn't part of the approval process. Victor's smile weakened. What do you mean? I'm not authorized to discuss internal procedures. The managing director inclined his head toward Adrian before quietly walking away again. The room slowly returned to conversation, but something had changed. Several investors began watching Adrian instead of Victor. Not because they understood the situation, because experienced financiers recognized hierarchy. People with real authority rarely raised their voices. Adrian hadn't raised his once. Eleanor noticed the shift immediately. She hated it. For months she had built tonight around one clear message. Victor represented the future. Adrian represented the past. Now strangers were studying her husband with unexpected curiosity. She leaned closer. If you're trying to embarrass me, it's not going to work. I'm not trying to embarrass you. Then explain why senior management keeps treating you like someone important. I've worked with institutional clients for years, Victor answered before Adrian could continue. Exactly. Consultants often build relationships with hotel groups. The explanation sounded reasonable enough. Eleanor accepted it immediately. See? That's all this is. She looked at Adrian with visible disappointment. For one second, I almost thought you had finally decided to be honest. Adrian met her eyes. I have been honest. No, you've simply believed what required the least effort. She stared at him, unable to decide whether he had insulted her. Before she could respond, Raymond called everyone toward the presentation screens. The investment overview was about to begin. Slides appeared showing Price Meridian's flagship developments, occupancy projections, debt restructuring, future expansion. Victor stood beside the screen, explaining each phase with complete confidence. He spoke as though the investment had already been guaranteed. As soon as the final paperwork is processed, he announced, North Star's capital will secure every major property. Adrian listened carefully. That statement wasn't technically accurate. The committee had approved due diligence, not unconditional funding. The distinction mattered, especially to securities lawyers. His phone vibrated again. General Counsel. Video recording confirms public representation of guaranteed approval. Outside counsel recommends preservation of evidence. He locked the screen. Another notification followed. Independent directors have assembled remotely, awaiting chairman's guidance regarding disclosure obligations. Again, he did nothing. He watched. Across the ballroom, Graham whispered to several guests. You know, Adrian couldn't even explain what he actually consults on. Someone laughed. Maybe motivational speeches. Another answered. Apparently hotel managers are his biggest fans. The jokes continued. Adrian ignored them. Years earlier, they would have hurt. Now they simply confirmed how easily people mistook silence for weakness. The presentation ended with applause. Victor raised a champagne glass. To new beginnings, everyone followed. Everyone except Adrian. An investor seated near the front quietly approached Raymond. I have one question, of course. Has North Star officially announced final approval? Raymond hesitated. Victor assured us everything is complete. I asked whether North Star announced it. Victor answered quickly, the paperwork is merely administrative. The investor nodded politely but looked unconvinced. I've worked with institutional funds before. They don't usually consider billion-dollar approvals administrative. Victor forced another smile. Every firm has its own process. The investor returned to his seat without another word. Adrian noticed 3 more guests checking their phones. Rumors moved quickly among experienced financiers. Uncertainty moved even faster. Eleanor became increasingly frustrated. She pulled Adrian aside near one of the ballroom columns. Tell me honestly, what do you want to know? Why are investors suddenly looking at you? I don't know. You do. I know they're asking questions. No, they're asking questions about the deal. She searched his face. For the first time that evening, she couldn't read him. He wasn't defeated. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't even angry. He looked like a man waiting for a meeting to begin. That realization unsettled her more than any argument. Across the ballroom, Daniel Brooks received a discreet phone call through his earpiece. He listened for several seconds before ending it. Then he walked directly toward Adrian once again. This time he carried a sealed navy folder embossed with North Star Meridian Group's silver compass emblem. He stopped beside Adrian and spoke quietly enough that only Adrian could hear. Mr. Price, the General Counsel has confirmed that every independent director is now present. He offered the folder with both hands. They're asking whether you'd like the emergency board session convened immediately. Adrian looked at the Navy folder for a long second before accepting it. Thank you, Daniel. General Counsel is waiting, sir. I know. Daniel gave a respectful nod and stepped aside. Eleanor stared at the folder. The silver compass embossed on the cover looked familiar. She had seen the symbol on confidential documents related to North Star's investment, but she could not understand why a hotel manager had handed one directly to Adrian. What is that? She demanded. Business? She reached for the folder. Adrian calmly moved it out of reach. This isn't part of your company's transaction. It's part of mine. Victor laughed, though it sounded forced. Adrian, let's not pretend you're suddenly involved in institutional finance. I'm not pretending. Victor's smile faded. Before anyone could continue, 3 men and 2 women entered the ballroom through a private corridor. Their attire was understated, but Raymond immediately recognized one of them from previous negotiations. Margaret Ellis, outside counsel representing North Star Meridian Group. She rarely attended public events. If she appeared in person, something serious had happened. She walked directly toward Adrian. Mr. Price. Good evening, Margaret. The independent directors are assembled. I received your message. We've completed the conflict review. Victor stepped forward confidently. Excellent, then perhaps we can finalize the investment tonight. Margaret turned toward him with professional courtesy. I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, the committee has additional matters requiring clarification. What kind of matters? I'll discuss them with the appropriate parties. Victor waited for more. None came. Margaret returned her attention to Adrian. We're ready whenever you are. She walked away without another word. The silence she left behind felt heavier than any announcement. Raymond rubbed his forehead. Graham. What? Did she just report to Adrian? No, but it looked like she did. It couldn't have. Neither man sounded convinced. Across the ballroom, investors had stopped discussing real estate entirely. Now they were watching Adrian, watching the lawyers, watching Victor. The atmosphere had changed from celebration to uncertainty. Eleanor lowered her voice. Tell me the truth. I always intended to. Then why not now? Because this isn't the place. Her frustration turned into anger. You've spent years hiding behind vague answers. I protected my private life. You protected your ego. No, I protected my work from becoming part of our marriage. Victor placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's shoulder. This is exactly what insecure people do. They create mystery because they have nothing real. Adrian looked directly at him. You've been making representations on behalf of North Star. That's called negotiation. You've also been guaranteeing approvals. Victor shrugged. Everyone knows the deal is moving forward. That's not what I asked. For the first time, Victor hesitated. Adrian already knew the answer. North Star's legal team had preserved recordings of every presentation, every promise, every public statement. The issue was no longer simply inaccurate marketing. It was whether investors had been misled. A discreet vibration interrupted Adrian's thoughts. He opened another secure message. Compliance review complete. Independent directors unanimously recommend immediate suspension of transaction pending disclosure of material conflicts. He read it carefully before locking the phone. Eleanor noticed only one thing. His expression never changed. No surprise, no panic, only quiet concentration. She suddenly remembered countless evenings when Adrian had excused himself for confidential conference calls. She had assumed they involved ordinary consulting clients. Now she wasn't so certain. Raymond approached cautiously. Adrian, yes? I need to ask something. Go ahead. Have you worked with North Star before? For several years. As a consultant. In different capacities. Raymond searched his face for clues. What capacities? I'm afraid I can't discuss confidential client relationships. It sounded like the same answer Adrian had given dozens of times throughout the marriage. Only tonight it no longer sounded evasive. It sounded protected. Legally protected. Before Raymond could continue, another attorney entered, carrying several sealed document cases. She walked directly to Margaret Ellis. The two women exchanged a few quiet words before both looked toward Adrian. Margaret nodded once. The attorneys opened one document case just enough for Adrian to see its contents. Conflict disclosures, board resolutions, emergency governance notices. He closed the case again without removing a single paper. Not here, he said quietly. I agree, Margaret answered. Victor had finally lost his patience. This is ridiculous. He raised his voice enough for nearby guests to hear. If there are legal questions, I should be included. I've led this transaction from the beginning, Margaret answered without emotion. Mr. Hale, according to our records, you advised Price Meridian during preliminary discussions. Correct. You did not lead North Star's review. Victor frowned. I never claimed I did. Margaret looked at him steadily. We have recordings that suggest otherwise. The color drained from Victor's face. Eleanor looked back and forth between them. What recordings? No one answered. Instead, Adrian slipped the sealed folder beneath his arm. He looked at Eleanor one last time. I didn't come here to embarrass you. Then what are you doing? I'm making sure the truth is handled in the right room. Margaret stepped beside him. The conference suite has been secured. The independent committee, outside counsel, lender representatives, and North Star executives are all waiting. She paused before adding the words that caused every nearby conversation to stop. And they're waiting for you to chair the meeting. The conference suite overlooked the Chicago skyline, but no one admired the view. A long walnut table filled the center of the room. Nameplates marked each seat. Outside counsel sat beside compliance officers. Representatives from 2 lending banks had already opened thick binders. 3 independent directors joined through encrypted video screens. Every conversation stopped the moment Adrian entered. They stood. Not dramatically, not out of fear, out of professional respect. "Good evening, Mr. Chairman," Margaret Ellis said. Adrian acknowledged them with a quiet nod before taking the chair at the head of the table. Across the room, Eleanor froze. Victor's confident smile disappeared completely. Raymond slowly lowered himself into his seat, as if his knees had suddenly weakened. Celeste whispered, "Chairman of what?" No one answered her. Margaret placed a sealed packet in front of Adrian. "For the record, the meeting has been called by the Independent Committee to review material conflicts affecting the proposed Price Meridian transaction." Adrian opened the packet without haste. "Let's proceed." His voice sounded exactly as it always had, calm, measured. Only now, everyone in the room obeyed it. Margaret activated the first presentation. "The committee has completed its review of North Star Meridian Group's governance procedures regarding Price Meridian properties." The first slide displayed organizational charts rather than financial projections. Several holding companies, private trusts, investment partnerships, institutional funds. The ownership structure appeared deliberately complex. Victor leaned forward. "I don't understand why we're reviewing North Star instead of closing." "We're reviewing both," Margaret replied. "The governance process requires this before any final authorization." She clicked to the next slide. "The committee first confirms that Mr. Adrian Price voluntarily disclosed a personal relationship with Price Meridian executive Eleanor Price before the transaction entered formal review." Eleanor looked sharply at Adrian. "You told them?" "I was required to," Margaret continued. "To avoid any appearance of self-dealing, Mr. Price recused himself from the initial valuation, pricing recommendations, and due diligence." One independent director spoke through the screen. "Those responsibilities were transferred to directors with no personal connection to the transaction." Another added, "Outside counsel supervised every stage." Raymond frowned. "You mean Adrian had already disclosed our marriage months ago?" "Yes, and none of us knew." "The disclosure was confidential." Victor shifted uncomfortably. "So where exactly does Mr. Price fit into this?" Margaret looked toward Adrian before answering. "He retained authority only where corporate governance required the chairman's approval after independent review." Victor laughed nervously. "Chairman of which subsidiary?" Margaret met his eyes. "North Star Meridian Group." Silence. Complete silence. Eleanor blinked. "That's impossible." "No," Margaret answered evenly. "It is documented." She placed certified corporate records on the table. "The ownership structure is held through family trusts, voting agreements, and private holding entities." Another attorney distributed additional documents. "Mr. Adrian Price serves as executive chairman and controlling beneficiary." Graham stared at the paperwork, but the newspapers never mention him. They rarely mention private control structures the company manages. He stopped reading. His eyes widened. Over $1 trillion in institutional assets. Margaret corrected him immediately. "The group manages and controls investment mandates exceeding $1 trillion through infrastructure funds, pension partnerships, credit vehicles, and operating companies." She paused deliberately. "That does not mean Mr. Price personally owns $1 trillion. She looked around the room. "The distinction is legally significant." Raymond slowly removed his glasses. Every conversation Adrian had tried to have over the past year suddenly returned to him. Questions about debt covenants, governance rights, liquidity, independent counsel. He had assumed Adrian was guessing. Now he realized Adrian had understood every weakness in Price Meridian before anyone else. Eleanor could barely speak. You led North Star? I lead it, and you never told me? I told you I had a family trust, institutional responsibilities, and a prenup protecting assets you never asked about." "That's not the same, no," Adrian said quietly. "It isn't," Victor interrupted. "This changes nothing." Everyone turned toward him. "The investment still benefits Price Meridian." Margaret opened another file. "Actually, Mr. Hale, this is where your role becomes relevant." A compliance officer projected several emails onto the screen. Victor's smile vanished. The messages showed him requesting a success fee, a future executive position, and a board appointment if the transaction closed. Additional emails appeared, private messages between Victor and Eleanor, meeting schedules, hotel invoices, travel expenses. Then another document. Victor's written assurances to potential investors claiming North Star approval had already been secured. "I never guaranteed anything," Victor protested. Margaret pressed a button. An audio recording filled the room. Victor's own voice echoed clearly. As soon as I give the signal, North Star's approval is locked in. The recording ended. No one spoke. The compliance officer broke the silence. Mr. Hale, you were never authorized to make that representation. Another attorney addressed Eleanor. Our review also found confidential Price Meridian information transmitted to Mr. Hale before appropriate approvals. Eleanor looked horrified. I thought he needed those documents for negotiations. Or perhaps, Margaret replied. That determination will be made during the internal investigation. Adrian remained silent throughout. He did not accuse, he did not celebrate. He simply reviewed each page before him. Finally, one of the independent directors spoke. Mr. Chairman, the committee requires your instruction on one remaining matter. Every eye in the room turned toward Adrian. The director continued. Given these undisclosed conflicts, should a North Star suspend the rescue transaction until the committee determines whether Price Meridian remains eligible for investment? Several months passed before the final pieces settled into place. North Star Meridian completed its investment only after lenders, regulators, and shareholders approved the revised structure. Price Meridian survived, but not as the family empire Raymond Price had once controlled. Independent directors now oversaw the company. New governance policies replaced old habits. Hundreds of employees kept their jobs because the rescue had been built on sound business rather than personal revenge. Victor never returned to the transaction. His firm terminated his advisory contract after its internal compliance review confirmed that he had concealed conflicts of interest and made representations he had no authority to make. He was not ruined overnight, but the reputation he had spent years polishing disappeared far faster than he expected. The exclusive invitations stopped arriving. The calls from investors became noticeably shorter. Eleanor faced her own consequences. After an internal investigation, she resigned from Price Meridian. Months later, she accepted a position at a smaller development company, where no one treated her like the owner's daughter. For the first time in years, every opportunity had to be earned without family influence or borrowed prestige. The divorce concluded quietly through negotiated settlement. Both attorneys reviewed the prenup carefully. The agreement remained enforceable after independent legal examination. Adrian's interests in North Star stayed protected under the trust structure, while their jointly acquired assets were divided fairly according to the settlement and applicable law. Adrian never demanded more than he was entitled to, and he never used Eleanor's affair simply to humiliate her. On the afternoon the final documents were signed, Eleanor asked if they could speak privately. I kept thinking your secret was the biggest betrayal, she admitted softly. But after everything, I finally understood that your silence didn't make me choose Victor. It didn't make me laugh when my family mocked you. Those were my choices. Adrian listened without interrupting. I should have trusted you with more of my life, he answered honestly. Keeping that much hidden created distance between us. I accept that. But secrecy didn't force contempt into our marriage. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, yet she did not ask him to come back. She already knew the answer. I'm sorry, she whispered. I believe you are, Adrian said, and I hope you build a better life from here. He offered a small, respectful nod before walking away. It was forgiveness without reconciliation. Weeks later, Adrian returned to the Halcyon Grand Hotel. This time, there were no cameras, no gala, and no family waiting to judge him. The ballroom that had once held a table beside the service entrance had been redesigned for a North Star community investment announcement. Instead of celebrating luxury, the company introduced a long-term program supporting affordable commercial spaces, infrastructure apprenticeships for adults, and neighborhood redevelopment across Chicago. As employees gathered, several hotel staff members recognized Adrian. They thanked him quietly for the grace he had shown on the night of the gala. He thanked them in return. They had treated him with respect long before anyone knew his title. Walking through the hotel's main entrance, Adrian realized he no longer felt the need to make himself invisible. His wealth had never defined his worth, and neither had the humiliation he endured. What finally mattered was that he had reclaimed his own voice without sacrificing his character. If Adrian had revealed everything sooner, do you think the marriage could have been saved, or was respect already gone? Share your thoughts in the comments, and join us again for another unforgettable story.